I had no idea that the hand on my shoulder that morning would save my life. I remember the exact moment. Terminal B, Gate 17. I was dragging my carry-on behind me, half asleep, thinking about whether I'd remembered to pack my blood pressure medication. My son-in-law was walking about 10 feet ahead, and my daughter was beside me, chattering about the hotel in Scottsdale, about the pool, about how I needed this trip. "Dad, you work too hard even in retirement," she said. 3 days. Son, golf, family. That's it. She squeezed my arm. I smiled at her. That was the last normal moment I had for a very long time. The hand came from behind. Firm, deliberate. Not aggressive, but not gentle either. I turned and there was a man in a navy jacket, TSA badge on his lanyard, expression completely flat. He leaned in close enough that I could smell his coffee. "Sir," he said very quietly, "I need you to look angry right now, like I'm giving you trouble. Can you do that for me?" I stared at him. "Please," he said, "there's no time to explain. Your family's watching. Look frustrated." Something in his eyes, dead serious, not a flicker of anything performative, made me do it. I don't know why. 63 years of being a reasonable man, and I just listened to the stranger. I frowned. I crossed my arms. I said, louder than necessary, "Is there a problem, officer?" He nodded, playing the part. "Sir, I need you to come with me." Routine secondary screening. My daughter turned around. Her face shifted. Worry, mild annoyance, the look of a daughter who doesn't want her airport morning interrupted. "Dad? What's happening?" "It's fine, sweetheart," I said. "Just a bag check. You two go ahead to the gate." My son-in-law had stopped walking. He was watching me. Not the way you watch your father-in-law get inconvenienced. Something else. His jaw was tight, and he had his phone half raised, like he was about to make a call, and then decided not to. I followed the agent through a door marked Off-Force Personnel. The hallway behind it was fluorescent and gray and smelled like industrial cleaner. 2 other men in plainclothes were waiting. One of them held up a badge. Not TSA, FBI. "Mr. Ashworth," he said, "my name is Agent Colby. I need you to sit down. We have about 15 minutes before your family starts asking questions. My name is Clifford Ashworth. I am 63 years old. I retired 2 years ago after building a supply chain logistics company from nothing. 22 employees in 1987, 411 by the time I sold it. My wife, Roberta, died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. I still haven't figured out how to sleep in our bed without her. I have 1 child. A daughter I love more than I have words for." I sat down. Let me back up, because none of this will make sense without the beginning. And the beginning was not the airport. The beginning was Roberta's funeral, and the man my daughter had married 2 years before that. His name is Trace. My son-in-law, Trace. When my daughter first brought him home, I thought he was exactly the kind of man I'd have worried about. Smooth, a little too comfortable in any room, the kind of handshake that's firmer than it needs to be. But my daughter was happy, genuinely happy, and I told myself I was being a suspicious old fool. He worked in commercial real estate. He drove a nice truck. He was polite to Roberta in that deliberate way people are when they're performing politeness rather than feeling it. I let it go. After Roberta died, my daughter started calling more. Every few days at first, then almost every day. I appreciated it. I was hollowed out in a way I hadn't expected, even though the ending was not a surprise. She brought me dinners. She took me to my follow-up appointments. She sat with me on the back porch and we talked about her mother, and I cried in front of another person for the first time in maybe 30 years. It was 3 months after the funeral that she first brought up the estate. "Dad, I just want to make sure everything is in order. Trace has a friend who does estate planning. Really good, very discreet. Would you just talk to him?" I said I'd think about it. My own attorney had handled everything for years. I didn't see the need. She brought it up again the following month. Then Trace brought it up himself, casually, over dinner, like an afterthought. "Just a conversation, Clifford. No pressure. Guy's brilliant." I changed the subject. What I didn't know then was what Agent Colby would tell me in that gray hallway. That Trace had debt. Not the ordinary kind. Not a business loan or a second mortgage. The kind of debt that comes from spending 4 years betting heavily on real estate deals that never closed, from borrowing privately at rates that compound badly, from promising investors returns that required outcomes that never materialized. The kind of debt where people call you at hours when polite people don't call. He owed, as of that morning, just over $800,000 to 3 different private creditors. One of them had a history that made Agent Colby's voice go flat when he said it. My estate, according to my attorney's last accounting, was worth just under $4 million. My daughter was my sole heir. I don't know exactly when my daughter became part of it. That's the question I've sat with every night since. Was she in it from the beginning, or did he bring her in slowly? Did she love him enough to follow him into something terrible? Or did she love the idea of security enough to look away from how it was going to be secured? I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure I ever will. What I know is what Agent Colby told me in that 15-minute window, and what I later confirmed through documents that I wish I'd never had to read. Trace had been in contact with his creditors about a timeline. My daughter had, 3 weeks before the Scottsdale trip, quietly changed the beneficiary documentation on a joint account in a way that her own financial advisor found irregular enough to flag. That financial advisor had a sister who worked in white-collar financial crimes. Things moved from there in ways I don't fully understand, but they moved. The Scottsdale trip was proposed by my daughter. A gift, she said. 3 days, sun, golf, family. The hotel reservation was in Trace's name. They had booked rooms on the 3rd floor. I had been assigned a room on the 3rd floor with a small private balcony overlooking a courtyard that was, I later learned, not overlooked by any other room. The falls from that balcony, Agent Colby said, in his careful, measured way, would almost certainly be fatal on impact with the courtyard below. He said it like he was reading a weather report. I think that's how they're trained to say things like that. I sat in that gray chair under those fluorescent lights, and I thought about my daughter's hand on my arm in the terminal. Dad, you work too hard even in retirement. I thought about how I'd smiled at her. I thought about Roberta. Her last coherent week, she'd said to me, "Watch out for yourself, Cliff. You're too trusting, you always were." I'd laughed. I'd told her I had nothing left to worry about except my golf handicap. "Mr. Ashworth," Agent Colby said, "I need to know if you're willing to continue on the trip." I looked at him. "We need you on that plane," he said. "We have surveillance capability at the resort. We have a documented financial motive and preliminary forensic evidence on the account changes, but we need conduct. We need them to actually try. Otherwise, their attorneys argue intent was never acted upon, and they walk." I was 63 years old, and I had just been told that my daughter and her husband had possibly planned to throw me off a balcony in Arizona. "Will you be there?" I asked. "Every hour," he said. "You will never be alone." I thought about what Roberta would say. Probably something practical. Probably something about how the thing you're most afraid of is usually the thing you have to walk toward. "All right," I said. "Let's go to Scottsdale." They coached me on the plane. Not obviously. A man who had boarded separately, reading a thriller novel 3 rows back, who caught my eye once and gave me a small nod. I had a phone with a number I could text. I had a phrase, "checking into the room now," which meant I was alone and everything was normal. I had another phrase I hoped I would never have to use. I sat between my daughter and Trace on the flight. My daughter fell asleep on my shoulder somewhere over New Mexico. Her hair smelled like the shampoo she'd used since college. I looked out the window at the flat brown earth below, and I kept my face still. Trace spent most of the flight on his phone. I watched him, the way you watch something from the corner of your eye when you're pretending not to. His thumbs moved quickly. He cleared his screen when the flight attendant came by. Once he glanced at me and smiled, and I smiled back, and something behind his eyes was measuring, calculating, the way you calculate a distance when you're not sure about a jump. I thought, I made this man part of my family. I stood next to him at an altar and shook his hand and called him son. I kept smiling. The resort was the kind of place Roberta would have loved, and immediately felt guilty about loving. All terracotta and desert landscaping, a pool that glowed turquoise in the early evening, staff who appeared before you realized you needed anything. My daughter was delighted. She took pictures of everything. She held my arm as we walked to our rooms and said, "See? Isn't this perfect, Dad?" "It's perfect," I said. My room was 312. The balcony faced the courtyard exactly as described. I stood at the railing for a moment after I checked in, looking down. The courtyard had decorative gravel and 2 potted saguaros. The distance was maybe 40 feet. I stepped back inside and texted, checking into the room now. 3 seconds later received, all good. Rest tonight. Dinner was the 3 of us at the resort restaurant. My daughter had a glass of wine. Trace had 2. He was expansive, charming, the version of himself I'd seen at Christmas dinners. Telling a long story about a deal he was brokering, making me laugh twice, refilling my water glass before I asked. I watched my daughter watch him and saw something that might have been affection and might have been rehearsal. After dinner, she hugged me at my door. "Sleep well, Dad. Golf tomorrow at 8. "I'll be ready," I said. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the air conditioning and thought about 40 feet of air and decorative gravel. And I thought about $800,000. And I thought about my daughter's face when she was 7 years old and had broken my watch by accident and came to confess it. Crying before she even knocked on my study door. Where does that little girl go? Does she go anywhere, or is she still in there, buried under something I can't see from the outside? The first day passed quietly. Golf was golf. Trace was pleasant on the course, competitive in the mild way of men who need to win, but know better than to show it too much. My daughter rode in the cart and took more pictures and brought us cold bottles of water from the cooler. I did not drink from my bottle until I had watched them open their own first. It was a small thing, maybe paranoid. Agent Colby had not suggested that anything would happen on the first day. But Roberta always said I had good instincts buried under too much politeness. And so I watched, and I was careful, and the day passed without incident, and that night I ate dinner and said good night and lay awake again until the desert sky turned pale. The second night was different. We'd had a long afternoon by the pool. My daughter brought me a drink, something citrus, she said, because she knew I didn't like things too sweet. She set it down in front of me with a smile. Then she said she was going to change for dinner, and she went inside. I looked at the drink. I thought about the phone in my pocket. I set the drink aside. I didn't make a production of it. I just reached for the water instead and said I was watching my sugar. When she came back, she glanced at the full glass, and something moved across her face. Not concern, something else. She looked at Trace. He looked at her. 2 seconds, maybe less. Then she was asking about dinner reservations again. I had texted from behind my sunglasses. Drink left for me, untouched. Room 312. The response came quickly. Noted. Do not consume anything you haven't opened yourself. Stay in common areas tonight. Dinner that evening was quieter. Trace's charm was slightly off-tempo, like a musician playing a piece he'd practiced too many times and had stopped hearing. My daughter kept touching the stem of her wine glass without drinking from it. I told a long story about a logistics contract I'd negotiated in 1994, detailed and boring on purpose, watching their eyes go polite and distant. After dinner, Trace suggested a nightcap on my balcony. Great view of the property at night, he said. Stars out here are unbelievable. I'm wiped out, honestly, I said. Old man problems. I'll see you both at breakfast. He nodded. His jaw was doing the thing it had done at the airport. I went upstairs. I locked my door. I sat in the armchair by the window, not near the balcony, and I sent the second text. 20 minutes later, there was a quiet knock, not the door to the hallway. The internal connecting door I hadn't noticed connected to the room beside mine. Agent Colby came through it with 2 other agents. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, the drink by the pool, we got a sample from the glass. I nodded. It'll take the lab time to confirm, but we're proceeding as if. He sat down across from me. Tonight I want you to sleep in this chair. Don't go near the balcony. Don't open the exterior door. We're in 311 and 313, and there's someone in the courtyard. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow, he said, they're going to realize the window is closing. The reservation is only 3 nights. If they're going to act, they'll act in the morning. I looked at him. How do you know they'll try at all? Maybe they'll just, Mr. Ashworth, he said, not unkindly. The lab on that account paperwork came back this morning. Your daughter signed a document 2 weeks ago that would transfer primary estate authority to a joint trust controlled by both of them in the event of your death. Her own signature notarized. This isn't hypothetical. The room was very quiet. She signed it, I said. Yes. I didn't say anything else for a while. The morning of the 3rd day, I was at the breakfast table when Trace sat down across from me. My daughter wasn't there yet. He poured coffee. He pushed the cream toward me. He said, Sleep okay? Like a stone, I said. He nodded. Something behind his eyes had gone very still. Clifford, he said, and then stopped. Something on your mind, I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, I just want you to know how much it means to us, you being here. After everything you've been through. After losing Roberta. He paused. You deserve to be happy. You know that, right? It was, I think, meant to be reassuring. It was the most frightening thing I'd heard in 2 days. I know, I said. I am. My daughter arrived. She kissed the top of my head. She ordered eggs. She was animated, laughing at something on her phone, entirely herself. And I watched her and felt something split cleanly in 2 inside my chest. The love didn't go anywhere. That's what no one tells you. It doesn't go anywhere. It just sits next to the grief, and they take up the same space, and it's almost unbearable. After breakfast, Trace suggested one more walk down by the pool before checkout. Last chance, he said. Beautiful morning. I'd like that, I said. We walked the 3 of us to the far end of the pool terrace. The morning was cool and bright. My daughter was a step ahead, phone out. Trace was beside me. The terrace had a low decorative wall at the edge that dropped about 12 feet to a landscaped area below. Not fatal, but the wall was very low, and the morning was very bright, and Trace's hand came to rest on my shoulder. That's when the agent stepped out. 3 of them, from 2 directions, with 2 uniformed officers from the Scottsdale PD behind them. Agent Colby addressed both of them in a voice entirely different from the one he'd used with me. Clipped, formal, no warmth at all. My daughter turned around. The look on her face when she saw the agents, and then saw me standing untouched, that look is the one I'll carry for the rest of my life. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was the look of someone who knew, on some level, that a thing was always going to end this way, and had decided to hope it wouldn't and was now standing in the ending. She said, "Dad?" And then they were reading them their rights, and she stopped talking, and I couldn't look at her anymore, so I looked at the desert instead. The saguaros in the morning light, ridiculous and ancient and unbothered. I flew home alone that afternoon. Agent Colby had told me the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, attempted poisoning pending lab confirmation. Federal charges because of the financial documentation, which gave them jurisdiction across state lines. The estate documentation alone was enough to remove any ambiguity about intent. Trace's creditors were contacted. The FBI, it turned out, had been interested in one of those creditors for an entirely separate reason. That cooperation did not help Trace's situation. My daughter's attorney called me 3 weeks later. She wanted to speak to me. Her attorney said she was prepared to cooperate fully, that she wanted me to know something. I didn't take the call. It wasn't anger, or at least not only anger. It was that I didn't trust myself yet to hear her voice and still think clearly. I needed to be able to think clearly. I spent the months after that doing small things. I called my attorney and had the estate documents rewritten from the ground up. I called my accountant. I called my oldest friend, a man named Brecken, who I've known since we were 22 years old, and I drove out to his lake house, and we sat on the dock for 2 days, and I told him everything. He didn't say much. He's always known when not to say much. I went back to Roberta's grave on a Tuesday in November, and I stood there for a long time. I told her she was right. She usually was. The trial was not the ordeal I expected, mostly because I kept my head down and let the attorneys do what I'd paid them to do. The lab confirmed the presence of a sedative compound in the poolside drink, high enough concentration to disorient a man my age significantly, potentially cause a fall. Combined with the estate documentation, the prosecution argued clear and coordinated intent. Trace was sentenced to 22 years. The financial fraud charges added a consecutive count that the judge declined to merge. My daughter pled guilty to the conspiracy charge after the lab results came in. She received a significantly reduced sentence, 9 years, in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. I did not attend the sentencing. I sent a letter to the judge's office, through my attorney, asking that her sentence reflect what I genuinely believed, that she had been manipulated by a person she loved into something she would not have imagined doing alone. I don't know how much that letter mattered. Probably not much. Judges have their own frameworks. After it was done, I didn't feel the relief people seem to expect. I felt tired. I felt like a man who had walked a very long way and arrived somewhere unfamiliar and had to figure out, now, what the next thing was. The next thing, it turned out, was smaller than I expected. I started cooking again, Roberta's recipes, from the card file she kept in the kitchen, her handwriting in blue ink on index cards with tiny grease spots from 40 years of use. I started walking in the mornings. I got a dog, a large and uncoordinated rescue, who knocked things over and expected to sleep on the bed and turned out to be exactly what I needed. Brecken came for Thanksgiving. 2 of Roberta's sisters came for Christmas. The house that had been very quiet started to feel, not full exactly, but inhabited. Like it had a reason to hold heat. There's something I've been asked, when people who know the story ask anything at all, and it's whether I'm angry. I don't know how to answer that cleanly. There's anger in there somewhere. Of course there is. But underneath the anger is something more complicated. Something that involves a 7-year-old girl and a broken watch, and the way she looked when she knocked on my study door, and the way she looked on that terrace in Scottsdale when everything ended. I loved her. I love her still, in the way you love something you've lost, with more gentleness than you expected, and more grief than you thought you had room for. She's going to be out someday. I don't know what that day looks like. I don't know if she'll call me, or if I'll answer if she does. I try not to make decisions about things that far in advance. Roberta used to say that the future is not a problem you solve in the present, and she was right about most things, so I'm trying. What I know is this: the trust I carried around for 63 years, that basic assumption that the people who said they loved me meant it. I can't carry that the same way anymore. That's a loss, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Some things don't grow back the way they were, but I'm still here. I made it off that balcony without going over it, and I still make Roberta's pot roast on Sundays, And the dog sleeps at the foot of the bed and snores so loudly I wake up laughing. And every morning I walk to the end of my street and back, and the light, this time of year, comes in low and golden across the neighbors' yards. And it's really something. It's really something when you let yourself see it.